Hello to everyone again, and welcome to the Dietitian Against Diets podcast show. I am your guest, Rashonda Thornton. I'm excited again, as always, but even more so to introduce you to a dietitian friend of mine. Her name is Georgie, and she has really changed the game when it comes to changing the language and how we talk to ourselves and how we live in a world where we can kind of give ourselves more versus thinking that we always have to take whenever it comes to eating healthy. So I'm excited to let you guys hear this conversation because even I myself learned a lot. So before we jump into that actually brings to upon a good topic, because when you think about eating healthy, think about eating healthy for life. I know most of the time when we're taught to eat healthy, it's always a time frame, it's always a time window. But the fact that the thought of eating a certain way for the rest of your life, it can feel overwhelming because you're thinking with most diets or most time that we're eating healthy is that we should just eat for a certain period of time and then we're done. We can go back to eating the way we want to eat. But actually, it is a lifestyle. And a lot of times people are scared to take that dive because they feel like a life of healthy eating is something that's boring, it's something that's restrictive, it's something that doesn't give them the freedom that they used to have, when it's actually the opposite. I like to use this paradox, and I want to give you this because I want you to think this, start thinking differently in how you can bring into a world of healthy eating into your life and look at it as a long-term thing. When you think about it, the minute someone tells you that they're eating healthy, the first thing you think of is there's a certain amount of food that you can only eat. And there's a whole bunch of food that you can't eat. So you automatically feel like you're in this box. And so who wants to be in a box? And definitely not myself. I'm definitely not you. So the moment you think of eating healthy, you think there's these rules I have to follow. I have to take a deep breath and just push myself and go through it. And you're not excited about it. Well, actually, when it comes to healthy eating, it's actually the opposite. When you are looking at the diversity of the different types of foods that fall into that category, it actually expands your horizon. It actually helps you to see the variety and a multitude and diversity of so many different foods that falls into that category of healthy living. And so when you are stepping onto that stage and you're able to see and you're learning, you're growing, you know more, and you see there's so many different options now, you can actually turn around and look back at the way you were living beforehand and think about what foods did you eat. And when you go back and you compare, you'll find that the foods that you surrounded yourself around, you may have 10 dishes that you just loved. You may have 5 or 6 snacks that were always your go-to snacks. Well, when you look at it in a bigger picture, the way you used to live, with the limited of these 10 certain foods that you only ate or these certain snacks that you only ate, you felt that was freedom. Well, it's actually the opposite because you were limiting yourself. Your options on the healthy side is way more vast than your options beforehand. So the paradox is that you'll find is that once you realize how many different ways of eating healthy there is and how many routes and different varieties and different flavors and spices and just so much creativity that can be involved, you kind of look back at your life before and you find that was the box. That was the limitation. That was the, list 5 things on your hand that you ate. And so with the idea of living in a world where you have this variety of certain foods, that's how you can take away that fear of feeling like living healthy for life. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. But, until you start stepping onto that stage and start experimenting and learning more, you're never going to think that way. And also it doesn't help that society, marketing companies have always told you that you have to, follow the straight line of healthy foods and you only have a small window of foods to eat. If you're always taught that and showed that and marketed to that, of course you're going to think that eating healthy is something that you can't see yourself doing for a long time. Instead of looking at healthy eating as a one-lane highway where it's only one path, look at it as a broad 7-lane freeway where each lane goes different directions. They're, I want to say they're all the same speed limit, but we know how it works when you're on a freeway. Everyone's not going the same speed. And you can go into different lanes if you want. It's so much out there when it comes to healthy eating. Don't feel like you have to limit yourself. The best stuff I would tell you to do is just take your time and learn, try some things out, push yourself out there a little bit and learn and try new things. And you may find that you actually like them. So what that means, you start feeling better. You start looking better. And then you start enjoying this new way of living. And when you start enjoying this new way of living, then it can look like a reality that you can find yourself in and that you will want to be in for the rest of your life. So again, start thinking differently. Don't think that you're locked or relegated to a box. There's a lot out there when it comes to healthy eating. You just have to find what fits you and what fits you for the rest of your life. So I want to encourage you to continue to do that. You may not get it right the first time. You may not like the first option you take. That's why so many more out there. So continue to figure it out for yourself, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to live a life of healthy living that you can enjoy and that you can see with living in for the rest of your life. So hope that was something stuck out of all those pieces of those analogies that I gave to you. But I think that's the point of having podcast shows like this, because there's something of value that comes to you that stands out that you'll be able to take with you and move on with your life. So that's the point, and that's the goal of this particular podcast. So I will introduce you to my guest. But again, before I start talking with Georgie Fear, I can't help but introduce you to one of my podcast partners. Been around, again, since day one. I have some great supporters, and I'm so appreciative of them. But one in particular here in St. Louis, but even though it's a St. Louis company, you can get it from across the world. They're called Banner Roads Baking Company. And guess what? They have just now opened up their doors. They have a standalone baking company where you can go in and purchase a granola. You don't have to buy it at a grocery store. You don't have to find a place where they may have a limited variety. They now have a space for that. So they have grown to this capacity. And if this doesn't say enough about not only that the flavors and the nutrients they provide, I don't know what else can be said. If a company can grow like this, it says a lot about their products. And I'm very proud to stand alongside them with that. They are known for their eclectic combinations, such as spicy with sweet, savory with salty, chocolate with spice. Take a look online and go to their website at bannerroad.com. Or if you go there, you can type in your zip code, find a store near you that sells Banner Road. I think it's easier to go online and order some things on there, and they'll ship it right to your house. And you can always ship it to others' houses as well. So you can always spread the nutrition, spread the wealth. It's the reason why they're called the best granola in the world. Learn more about them, their flavors, their delivery system, even their new store. Go to their website at www.bannerroad.com or follow them on Instagram at bannerroads. Ready to talk to Georgie? Well, hi, everyone. Again, this is Rashonda Thornton, and welcome to the Dietitian Against Diets podcast show. Every week, there's going to be a unique conversation, not necessarily centered around nutrition and food, but perhaps our lifestyle and how we perceive life and how can we make our life better. So I want to introduce you to my guest today. She is also a fellow dietitian as myself, and also she's a sports dietitian. Her name is Georgie Fear. I will give you a little bit about her position. Now, she called herself the non-diet dietitian. She has a non-diet approach, which is very similar to myself. And her mission is to really just to help people to not really live and depend on the diet set mindset. She even wrote a book called Give Yourself More. And if you think about just the wording of it, give yourself more. In diets, as you all probably know, we're always taught to take away, take. It's really about enriching your body, enriching yourself. So how can you start to give yourself more instead of thinking that you have to take it away? So we'll definitely talk more about that book. But the whole point is that her goal is to change the losing mindset about how we feel about our body and our life, and just create positive language. So it's all about that psychology of eating. And I think that's kind of a topic that has become very, very prominent in our times. So I'm very, very excited to welcome Georgie to the podcast show. Georgie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Rashonda. I'm glad we get to sit down and chat today.
Yes, I'm glad too. And I didn't tell everyone, Georgie she's in Canada. She's in Canmore, Alberta, which is near the Canadian Rockies. So we're going across the lines here. And I think that's great because we're learning that this is a world, this is a thing the world needs to hear, not just, particular North U.S. So I'm glad that we're able to kind of cross those lines and have these similar conversations, So Georgie, I know why I know the steps that led towards me thinking differently as a dietitian. And so I'm always curious to understand other dietitians' pathway when I hear them speaking similar languages. Like, what was it that caused you to decide we're not going to do this diet approach, especially in our profession? We're taught to build calories and build food groups. And what made you kind of turn the corner at that and create your own approach or different?
Yeah, I always felt like, even for my first days as a practicing dietitian, that if you gave people too many things to change at once, it just wasn't going to pass the reality test. So even at the beginning, when I was still thinking, very much in terms of like food and macronutrient changes, I would always try and give people one change at a time. So I wouldn't say like, change all of these things about how you're eating. Maybe we'll just work on changing like some of the white grains that you eat to whole grains. So I was always like right from the beginning, very into like incremental approaches and never handing out meal plans, because I know nobody's going to follow a meal plan.
But that's the first thing to ask for.
Right. And then I think in every profession, you learn from what works for your clients and you learn from what doesn't work. And you learn, and I learned, as I think a lot of dietitians have, that what gets in people's way is often not a knowledge gap. It's kind of like they know what to do, but what they really need are the psychological tools to overcome barriers and to uncover what might be in their way in terms of blocking them from taking steps toward a goal. So I've had a lot of curiosity about psychology since I began, and just the more that I learn, I feel like the more tools I have to help my own clients and patients. And I find it super interesting. I think once you've learned, I don't want to say like all there is to know about food, but once you've learned a lot about food, it's really nice to look at another area and be able to take in some of those things as well.
And I think that's great that you said that, because I think that in society, we're taught to disconnect our emotional, psychological perspective from the food. And I think when we do that, we disconnect ourselves from what we eat. And then it just becomes a formula that we just put in place because this is what this system says, or just what this diet said. And as a dietitian myself, I totally get the psychology component. It's actually was one of my minors. And I realized
cool.
It's a big part of learning why we do what we do. And how can we change that language that we've been embedded? It's been ingrained in us to think a certain different way and to talk to ourselves a different way. And we don't even recognize that we do it. So I think even just creating a larger awareness of the psychology component of it is like huge for the nutrition and the health industry.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think a lot of people, they don't realize how much they think about their food, and they don't realize how much of their food behaviors come from them, in the sense of like their choices. It's not necessarily that there's this food or that food that's impacting you. A lot of times people kind of like blame the food, like, oh, if I'm around this food, I eat too much of it. But they're failing to recognize the power that they have inside to make different choices around foods.
And that's so true. And tell me your thoughts on, many times when it comes to our emotional connection with food and how we see foods, we always put them in this binary category of it's being good or being bad. Not even recognizing how tied we are to those emotions when we start interacting with foods, and we put them in those different categories.
Yeah, it's definitely a common dichotomy that people want to make. They're like okay foods and not okay foods. And I think it's really helpful to recognize that, one, foods don't differentiate into those two things. And as an extension, we don't have good or bad days of eating based on the foods that we eat. Because a lot of times I think the downward slope that people fall down is like, I ate a bad food, therefore I had a bad eating day, therefore I'm bad at nutrition.
Yeah.
So I trying to, recognize that there's all different types of foods. And yes, some of them are higher in sugar, some of them are higher in fat, some of them are higher in fiber, but you can build a healthy diet with all of these different foods in it. It's more a matter of getting the overall quantity right and making sure that you have an adequate intake of all the essential things that you need, but then also having fun with it and making sure that you enjoy your food and that you look forward to eating. Otherwise, whatever you're trying to do is just going to be temporary, right?
That is so true. And like you had, like in your bio, like you're really big on just changing that. It's really the perspective, because one thing about food, it doesn't change. What changes how we see it and how we interact with it, and to be able to not put it in these adversarial, like one's on this side, one is on that side, whichever one I engage in, that equals me. We have to learn to, first of all, there's balance, and our goal is really taking, and that's where I was telling you about my book. Food has many hats. It's our comforter. It's our stress reliever. it's our enemy, it's our corporate. It has all these just moving pieces in names. But again, it's those names is either black or white. And those names really define ourselves sometimes without us really recognizing it. And so I think, when you're talking about like changing like the mindset of helping people to overcome this losing idea of eating healthy, it really comes with, how they see things when it comes to their food. Because that's, it's really going to become how what your perspective, what your lenses look like when you're dressing some of these food. And it's not, we have to rethink or relearn how we interact with food and know that there is balance, there is fun foods, and just basically changing the language of them.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's expansive the more we learn about food and our ability to eat. I think as a young person, and I think as many other young people experience, you feel like, oh, you're interested in nutrition. Your first forays into learning more about how to feed yourself are more like, well, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and stay out of the cookies. And so as you learn more, I think you start to learn how many things you can include and how many options you have. And not only can food wear the hats, like you said, for comfort or entertainment, but we also have other options for comfort or entertainment. So it's nice to not only have food, but to be able to kind of, I say, play the field. Like play the field when you need some entertainment. You don't have to just always have something edible.
I love that. Like that's a great way. Like it doesn't have to be your only answer, right? And then your way of, to me, when you're looking for something that's comforting or you really want something that's reassuring, to me, I want it to be something that's self-serving. And I'm not saying food is not self-serving, but if we're choosing foods that we have this facade idea that it's going to give us that relief, or we're so stressed out, we had such a bad day, this is just going to solve our answers. Like it's a facade. It's a facade. Yeah. And then, the back end of it every single time, it doesn't create the solution, nor does it make us feel any better. So perhaps explore some of your other things in your life that would give you that relief, that would give you, the comfort that you need. That doesn't have to be related to food all the time. So I like that you said that, because sometimes people are not incorporating some of the other options that they probably can have that can be self-serving.
Yeah, it does. It gives you, I think it's helpful to think of it not as like we're not taking food away. If emotional eating is something that somebody is struggling with, it's not like we're taking away an option. We're just giving you other options, because when you try all of them, as you said, you might find things that build you up and help you feel better as opposed to making you feel worse.
Yeah. Now, one thing I agree with that so much, and I've seen that you have a couple of languages you use, and one of the ones that you use in regards to that emotional piece, and you call upward spiraling. So could you kind of like break that a little bit, because people are like, what is, you list downward, so what does upward really mean?
Right. So upward spiraling is a descriptor. I didn't invent it. It comes from research studies involving positive psychology and how that can impact health behaviors. So essentially, if we engage in healthy lifestyle behaviors, such as getting exercise, making home-cooked meals, choosing more vegetables, we can derive positive motivation, positive feelings from those. We start to feel good about ourselves, feel like, yeah, I'm taking good care of me. And then those positive feelings can lead to more positive behaviors. And so it creates a spiral of positive emotion, positive affect, and positive behavior. And so if you, most people would be familiar with the opposite effect, which would be doing something unhealthy and then feeling negative emotions and then continuing to go through continual unhealthy behaviors, because negative emotion has a way of making us not take good care of ourselves. So we want to kind of flip that and not only take the way to turn healthy behaviors into a healthy spiral is to use lots of positive feedback and lots of intrinsic rewards. Because one of the things that can stop your positive spiral in its tracks is if you're doing it for an external reward and then something happens and you either achieve that external reward, motivation goes up in smoke. So if you're only doing it to get into those size 6 pants that you have, you get into the pants and then you're like, all right, enough of that. There goes the motivation.
It's not enough.
Yeah. Or sometimes the external motivator gets taken away. So for example, let's say you're training for a race or a wedding and the event got canceled because of COVID. boom, motivation's just up in smoke as soon as that like little carrot got taken away. Another thing that can happen is if people do a weight loss challenge, as a lot of workplaces have done with people, and then at the end of the challenge, they award prize money, hurrah, and then what?
Then what's next?
Right? Yeah, there's like nothing to keep you going. So using external motivators tends to be relatively temporary. But if we use internal motivators, that would be like things that feel wholesome and like they're moving you toward the life that you want and the goals that you want, and they're positive self-esteem sort of feelings. And so if you take a positive behavior, positive action, you do all your workouts for a week, you then want to really feel for that positive reinforcement inside. Like, yeah, I feel pretty proud of myself. I can give myself a little self high five or a pat on the back, opposed to what some people would do, which would be like, yeah, but it was only 1 week. and just like cut themselves short and kind of like, yeah, but it's really hard for a lot of people, I find, to give themselves credit.
And so it's a couple things I want to say in response to that. But the first one is, so essentially what I hear you're saying is that external characteristics, what we see are things that are whimsical. Like I think in a society now, or it's starting to shift, which is what I'm very happy about. But over years, value is always defined by either, whether it's a scale, whether it's a size, what you see in the mirror. It's all about this outside. When you're changing, it's not about trying to change the outside. It's really about changing the inside. And that's on a physiological level when it comes to your nutrients and nutrition and your health and the body's digestive system and all the things and above. But it's more so has to do a lot about like I feel people are uncomfortable with doing things for themselves. And it's some of it's just this subtle negative self-talk that could be a part of their childhood, could be a part of their relationship they're in. It could be anything, but it's like they feel uncomfortable putting time into themselves. So when it comes to nutrition, and recognize nutrition is something that's an intrinsic thing, that it actually builds your confidence, it builds your self-value, it builds all of these things, because guess what? You're taking care of yourself. And so, it sounds like to me when you're describing it to, like, you want something that's it has more of a foundation, that's more imploding in regards to building you, versus you feeling like, I just need to do this because I have a wedding coming up in 3 months and I want to look good for that wedding dress. Like, that's not enough. Because then after the wedding, what's going to be, what's your rooted reason for change? And it can't be based off of some of those flighty values.
Yeah, I think appearance only motivates us so far. I don't think any of us are truly superficial enough to use appearance as like a permanent, lifelong motivator. And I think that's a good thing. I think we all know that there's just more out there. And so when people are motivated by appearance for a short period of time, and then they find themselves going out and eating ice cream with their partner, I'm kind of like, well, good for you, because you know that there's more to life, and like enjoyable experience is really important. So that's not a screw loose. That's like a very healthy circuit. So let's find a way to have enjoyment with the positive behaviors that we want to teach.
Yeah. I totally agree. So when you're, give me some insight when you're working with your clients, what are some of like the conversations you've had with them that just gave you more insight to what people in general perhaps think about themselves or their ability to or not to? Yeah,
a lot of the things that have struck me deepest about clients is similar to what you said earlier about how people are uncomfortable giving to themselves. And I find that so many of my clients' troubles have kind of developed over time because they were shortchanging themselves. And they may have been hesitant to take time for themselves or to put money into their own desires, or they may, and they may have felt like often I find if you have children, a lot of women, they just give and they give and they give and they give to the children. And that's not a bad thing. But if you're putting yourself last all the time so that you can put other people first, I think it's really helpful to recognize, like, step up to the same playing field as other people on the planet, because it's not like it has to be you or me. Like, we can both get our needs met. And I think Give Yourself More was really in response to seeing how culturally pervasive it was for women to put themselves behind other people and just generally allot ourselves less resources, not enough rest, as you said, not willing to invest money in things that were just plain joyous, or time in things that were just plain joyous. And giving ourselves more tends to solve so many problems when it comes to food. Clearly a lot of women and men have identified that they have undesirable experiences after they diet. So, after weeks of not having a carb or not having sugar, they often feel like there's a tension inside, and that kind of pops to the surface, and then they eat a lot of things. And so one of the most clear differences when people give themselves more in terms of feeding themselves adequately and not trying to get by on a starvation diet is that they tend to even out and not have some of those same, feast and famine sort of periods, or binging and then restricting sort of periods. So giving yourself more, definitely food is a huge part of it. I also find that pleasure and emotions are some of the places where so many of us have been conditioned to not indulge, not do things just because they're fun, and they feel like it's a waste of time, that they don't deserve to do something that's just enjoyment. And in terms of emotions, oh man, I mean, I'm the first person to raise my hand and say that I was very poorly equipped to be in touch with what I was feeling and express it. And so in my youth, I definitely had the experience of like going to food to try and either tamp down an emotion that I didn't know how to handle, or just distract me from it so I didn't have to pay attention to it, and I could fixate on like how many calories were in the cookies that I was eating. And I have found it's been really transformative for me and transformative for my clients to start to learn skills about feeling our feelings and doing things with them that are productive. Basically giving ourselves more emotional freedom. Really finds like, I find that a lot of food behaviors that were problematic just kind of like quiet down, because they were responses to being denied or shorted in a lot of other areas.
So it sounds like, the tag called, give yourself more. There's underlining it's underlining meanings to it. It seems like helping people to be okay with giving themselves just at a base, what they deserve, and then be able to kind of add more to it. And to me, it seems like for people, I can feel them anxiety building when they hear that, because they're scared to give themselves more, or they don't believe that they deserve more. They feel they give themselves more is taking away from others. So I think it really kind of adjusts the psyche and like how to enjoy giving yourself more and not look at it as a selfish act that you're taking away from others.
Right. It's a common objection, and it was Alicia, my co-author, and I, when we were writing the book, we didn't want to come across like the two of us are like very accommodating, kind, giving people. And the last thing we wanted was like a selfishness manual. Like, here's how you stomp on everyone and take. But it's more along the lines of the things that we're talking about giving yourself more of are not finite resources. It's not like there's only so much rest in the world, and if you take it, somebody else can't have enough.
Yeah, okay.
It's not like there's a finite well of pleasure in the world, and if you do something to make yourselves happy, that somebody else isn't going to get it. So, we talk about 6 areas of moreness, and none of them are finite. They're all none of them are a zero-sum game. All of them, you can give yourself more of something, and therefore also be able to share more with other people without having things like resentment build up. So it's kind of the opposite of selfishness. It's like generosity to yourself blooms into generosity for others, like you overflow.
So, and I love you're talking more about this in relating into your book, and the title, all of it ties in together. So like, if someone just were to see that your book, the cover, or they're seeing it, Amazon.com, like, even if you had like an opportunity just to kind of give people some insight on what to expect, how to prepare themselves, how to set themselves up mentally to be able to exhaust the resources that are in that book, like what is it about your book that you want people to really know beyond just the cover and the title?
I think it's helpful for everyone to really think about themselves in their own lives. And so that's one of the reasons that we have a quiz in there, is it can help you sort of see how this book and how the 6 areas might individually impact you. So, for example, if somebody, I'll rewind a touch. A lot of women come to Alicia and I wanting help with nutrition, wanting help with exercise. And Alicia and I are seeing the shortages that they have, but the women themselves aren't seeing it.
Okay.
So it's kind of important to share that vision with the client so the client can see like, wow, it's not that I have flawed willpower. A lot of times women think they're too greedy and that's why they're eating too much, or that's why they have excess weight on their bodies. It's actually more that you've been giving too much and that food might be filling the void for the other things that you could have more of, and we're encouraging you to explore more of and help yourself to more of them. And then you find that the impulsive, emotional, comfort eating can kind of fade away because you're fulfilled and sated and feeling complete because you've got all of your needs met. So
Wow.
I guess the first things that I would want women to know would be to look through the table of contents and see the different areas that we're talking about, and maybe consider which ones impact them. And I've found when we have these discussions, many women are first, they identify with emotions, that they recognize, something else to help me with my emotions, a skill there. If I had some more skills, that would help. And then they also often recognize with exercise that they could be having more joy, and that they could be having more of a gain mindset with exercise. Like, let me gain some strength in my shoulders, as opposed to let me burn off. Rather than like burning off part of my body, why don't I try and strengthen it and build endurance and power and perhaps even grow body parts. Like, there's nothing wrong. Alicia is super big on, there's nothing wrong with women having size goals in terms of working out. Nothing says you have to keep trying to be smaller and smaller and smaller. So, and then, so it's super interesting for me to get to know individual women and how they relate to the areas in the book. And we have a Give Yourself More Facebook group, and people will put like, what particular sentence or paragraph really grabbed them. And I just love seeing which individual areas speak to different women.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like you and Alicia, is that her? You call her name? It seemed like you guys somehow you found each other on the same wavelength and come with both your different strengths and be able to create a piece like that. But again, to me, it reminds me that how we see ourselves, how we interact with food, has nothing to do with nutrition. Like,
in a lot of ways, nutrition is like this big of our food intake.
Yes. And so like, and a lot of issues that we struggle with, like, again, we put food in our adversarial relationship with food as a placeholder, but it's like you said, it's kind of a distraction because it distracts us from actually getting to the core of why we feel this way, why we feel that we're not good enough, so we're not going to take care of ourselves. Like, to be at a healthy weight, it's not, it's something you should want to strive for, because first of all, you have the ability to do it. It's within your power, relatively speaking, and it to me, it just allows you to feel like you are you're doing something positive to yourself, positive to your body. And so, like, the whole idea that I gotta sigh when I need to start eating healthy, or I gotta feel like anxiety because I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it, if I want to do it, then all of a sudden you see these imaginary like walls being built around you. When you think about healthy eating, you think walls, right? You think cages.
Yeah.
And it's really the opposite, Georgie. It's really complete freedom. And
Totally.
That's when you're able to realize there aren't limitations. You actually have a plethora of diversity in food choices and what's good for your body. And we start realizing that there is a lot to be worked with. To me, it opens up and it changes this perspective. Like, to me, that's kind of what I'm never against diets, but just the mentality of a diet, because it just gives you this like this straight narrow line when you have a
Yeah.
10 lane highway of ways to eat healthy. So
Right. Who wants to wear the blinders?
yeah, like how can we like continue to find ways to first of all help people understand that is we struggle with our relationship with food, because it's things that we struggle with within ourselves. How can we learn to recognize that, learn to work through that, disconnect these ties that we have to food, and then be able to love ourselves enough to realize that we do deserve more and we should give ourselves more. And when we give ourselves more, we're able to actually give others more,
Yeah. It's a process, I think, but how nice, because we have time, right? I mean, like, we're interacting with food every day of our lives, and we're interacting with ourselves every day of our lives. So you're already going to be spending the time with yourself. You might as well look a little deeper. I think some of the beginning steps for how women can start to change, and I use the word women because, my book is predominantly geared at societal impacts upon women, but I definitely encourage men to read the book as well. And in fact, I think I have more Amazon reviews from men at the moment than women.
Interesting.
So, lots of men are liking the book. So I think some of the areas that we can all, begin this journey would be to take a step back and look at our lives completely separate from food, and seeing how that may have impacted the way that we do eat or don't eat. A lot of times, as you said, if somebody doesn't feel good enough, that can lead to a hobby of dieting, or a hobby of food restriction, or a hobby of reading fitness articles and bodybuilding magazines. And people think like they may not realize that very often stems from wanting to change their body, which stems from wanting to change something else about themselves.
Yeah.
And so that's worth looking at. It's not like you're wrong for having that desire. But sometimes the things that we want to change aren't as simple as the physical change. Sometimes it's a lot more complicated. If somebody's not feeling good enough, often reshaping their body will not make them feel good enough.
It won't change it.
Yeah. So I always want to stay in my lane in terms of psychology. And so I do encourage people that if they feel like, things are getting overwhelming, and trying to see their emotions clearly, if they find they're confusing, or if they're in outright emotional pain, that seeing a mental health professional is a fantastic place to start. A lot of times people will recognize that they can eat well, and that they do eat well, when they're managing their emotions well. When they're sleeping well, when they're expressing themselves, when they're not working 80-hour work weeks, that the food kind of falls into place. So sometimes the lifestyle behaviors are really the thing to focus on, and the food takes care of itself.
Yeah. I love it, Georgie. I mean,
Thanks.
Once again, it's bringing these conversations to the platform, because I promise you've said some things I haven't even thought about as a dietitian. So I know that there are so many people out there that it just hasn't been added to their repertoire thought processes. So hopefully these are nuggets that they can just kind of start being aware of, and allow them to kind of dig into it a little bit and kind of uproot that nugget, see what's underneath it, and see what kind of changes that can not just help them in their, their nutrition journey, but in just the overall journey of happiness. So I think it's great that you guys, for you yourself as a dietitian, stepping outside of the norm of dietetics in regards, we're needed in so many areas of health and life. So it's not that we're going against other dietitians. We're just working within this space and helping people to bring in some other components about their life that's centered around food and nutrition. So I'm glad to hear your voice and have resources out there that you and Alice has created.
Alicia,
I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
sorry, Alicia.
it's okay.
That you two ladies have kind of put together to start creating this change that we all need. So I really appreciate that. As we're getting ready to close, which is too soon, I know that people, need to continue to hear, not just your book, but what ways can people can reach out to you, can connect to you, follow your messaging? Because it seems there is a hunger for this type of thought process, this type of talk. So I want to make sure that we can provide that for people out there that are wanting and needing this.
Thanks. So if somebody wants to learn more about Give Yourself More, which is the title of my book, and how you can defy the diet industry and possibly reach your weight loss and life goals from doing exactly that. You can grab it on Amazon. You can also grab it from the publisher's website. We publish through On Target Publications. My name is Georgie Fear, and my website is georgiefear.com. So you can always get a hold of me there and drop a line through the contact form. And I also host a podcast, which is called Breaking Up with Binge Eating. And it is also appropriate for people that struggle with emotional eating as well as binge eating. We talk lots about feeling our emotions, coping with the difficulty of everyday life in its very real forms, and how to treat ourselves well without using food for, some of the not self-serving purposes that you mentioned, Rashonda. So I'm also very active on Facebook. So if you Google Georgie Fear, you'll probably find me on Facebook pretty quickly. There aren't too many Georgie Fears in the world.
Well, I love your name. I'm not sure if that's on purpose or, but it's meant, like your name says a lot. Even if it was like your mom and dad put that together, like I love the title. I mean, I love your name. And I think you have a unique name to where people can easily find you and kind of grab some of that information. So, Georgie, I do once again appreciate you just carving out time here again in Canada to talk to an American, but we're all dietitians on the same page and we're on the same side of this. And I'm glad to just have you here and be a part of these conversations that I know people really, really, really need in their lives. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for putting out the work that you do. I think you're right. We are all on the same team trying to build each other up and show each other how to give each other more while we're giving ourselves more. And the more we do it, the more we show other people they can do it too.
That's so great. Yes. And you heard it, guys. This is Rashonda Thornton again. But, I mean, if you didn't hear this particular podcast, I mean, just within itself, her title of her book called Give Yourself More, that's the whole point of this platform, is to learn how to start thinking differently, get away from the diet mentality and society and the way we've been trained to think about our interaction with foods, and start loving ourselves and being okay with giving ourselves more. So if you enjoyed this particular podcast show, and you know that this can definitely help so many other people out there, don't be afraid to share this. This only spreads the knowledge, spreads this ideal self-care and self-love, and go against this whole diet mentality. So share it, send it to those loved ones, and we're hoping to kind of turn this thing around. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Okay, well, great conversation, Georgie. I love every moment of it. As we're heading out of here, I want to talk a little bit about undeniably dairy. And some of the things that they're doing right now, they've done a lot for the community, especially during the COVID. They're teaming up with food banks. They're teaming up with schools. They're doing all these different things. But let's talk a little bit about those who maybe perhaps enjoy dairy, but dairy may not be so good to them. We're talking about those people that may have that lactose intolerance. But guess what? Lactose intolerance doesn't actually have to mean dairy avoidance. Lactose intolerance is a very individualized condition, but there's still a lot of great taste and nutrition benefits to some dairy foods that you can probably have in your diet. There are several meats and cheeses and yogurts that probably still work well, even if you can't drink the milk. For example, these are some ways that you can do it if you have a lactose intolerance or a spectrum of it. Working in small meals and choosing foods with minimum amount of lactose, that can be a way that you can kind of incorporate some of those nutrients in there. Think about some natural cheeses like cheddar, Kobe, Monterey Jack, mozzarella, and Swiss. They contain minimal amounts of lactose. Shred them up onto your veggies, add them to your pasta, your salad. And last but not least, yogurt is another option. It's live with cultures and active ways to help to digest lactose and digest in your system. And in addition, these dairy companies, they recognize that people want solutions to address their lactose intolerances. And they're creating this new lactose-free milk and milk products to meet their needs. These are real, great tasting products that can help keep you with nutrient-rich foods and dairy products in your diet. Learn what those products are and ways that you can incorporate some of these dairy products into your life and into your health by going to their website at www.dairygood.org, or follow them on Facebook, or follow them on Instagram at dairygood.